So, hey, Rob, it sounds like you may be a little bit under the weather, a little bit of a gravelly voice today.
Uh, a little bit, a little bit. Yeah, I am under the weather. Been fighting something for the past couple of days. It seems like it's a bit of a roller coaster where you think you're doing pretty good, which was yesterday, and then you wake up this morning and your head's a complete fog, and your voice sounds like this. So,
Well, I fought a cough for the last 3 weeks, so I'm glad that the cough is disappearing. I hope you feel better.
thank you, thank you.
All right, let's get to it. Welcome to another episode of Reimagining Cyber. I'm Stan Wisseman. I'm joined by my co-host, Rob Aragao. And Rob, we're going to do a bit of a retrospective on 2023 and looked at how it has potentially impacts or gives us an idea of what's to come in 2024.
Yeah,
And I'll start. Again, it's another bad year as far as the number of incidents and breaches. I think 30% increase is what I saw. How about
yeah,
you?
yep. Saw the same thing, and you're right. It's just like one after the other, right? It's more targeted, entities out there, more and more ransomware, of course, as well.
Now, there are some that had a multiplicity kind of impact, like the MOVEit or MOVEit
Yes.
data breach. I mean, that impacted thousands of organizations, and that was cross-sector as well. You also had the Okta breach, right? That impacted a lot of different organizations, and I think we certainly are going to continue to see ransomware as a continued trend as people as the threat actors see value in extorting funds out of organizations.
Agreed. I think, not picking on Okta by any means, right? We never pick on anyone that's been breached. I just look at the situation there as one that's kind of, very dependent, meaning that there's a lot of different organizations, public and private, that, rely on a common kind of platform for certain things that they need, right? In Okta's case, with single sign-on as an example. And a lot of those interconnections then become serious concerns of vulnerabilities that can be taken advantage of potentially, right? And you see this kind of, jump from one entity to the other entity. So I think, there needs to be a bit of a look back on seeing how we can actually be better at layering our different types of security controls where we're not so maybe dependent on one platform that then causes this kind of ripple effect throughout industry. And some of these types of situations that we've seen in the past are going to continue to get worse.
Well, I think that it's also related to another type of attack that we're seeing that started again with SolarWinds a couple of years back, as well as Log4j, is that software supply chain and being able to have a handle on what's in your environment. So when a 0-day or when an attack like this happens, you're able to respond quickly. And again, not picking on a particular vendor like a SolarWinds, but all vendors are possible targets. That trust relationship or the access provided to a solution like a SolarWinds was a juicy target for the threat actors, in this case, China, right? To take advantage of. And mentioning China, I mean, one of the things that I think we're going to have to be looking at is the enhanced or increased activity of nation state actors.
Yeah, definitely.
We speculated before the Ukraine's Russia war about cyber war, and now we're seeing it. We're actively seeing provable cyber war occurring, and the attacks on critical infrastructure and in all the different sectors. And I think as potential escalations go up with Iran, who is an increasingly skilled threat actor and on the stage, they could be launching additional attacks against U.S. infrastructure as well as those in Europe. So I think we need to have a enhanced nation-state threat intelligence and actual coordination on the cyber defense side. We already do some of this, but I just think it's going to have to be much more proactive.
Well, I think that the reality of the threats are much more prominent, right? The examples you mentioned are now reality. So we're at that point now where it definitely needs to be much more kind of focused upon. And listen, Iran is an absolute threat. I mean, we had an episode on the topic of Iran and their cyber capabilities and how quickly they're maturing. I don't know. I think it was probably over a year ago at this point in time. And, the examples are occurring again relative to what we've seen with the Ukraine and Russia conflict. So critical infrastructure, we talk about it, right? It was part of the executive order. If we kind of go way back to, I guess, even last year when it came out from the Biden administration, we just need to continue to see much more emphasis on our critical infrastructure capabilities of controls from a security perspective, and the level of threat intelligence that we're actually gathering, right? And being able to be more precise on how we can actually, protect our environments from being attacked. It's more critical than ever before.
Yeah, I don't know if this will be something we'll see in 2024, but it would be. I don't think it's outside the possibility that at some point we start looking at cyber diplomacy and some kind of international law about, what the norms are for state behavior in cyberspace. Can we, codify what like a equivalent to an arms control agreement or cyber non-aggression pacts? Again, I'm not sure who would take point on that, because let's face it, the United States is very active in this as well. And they wouldn't necessarily want to have guardrails on what they can and can't do against their perceived enemies. But at the same time, this free reign without any kind of perception of what would potentially trigger kinetic response is that sustainable? So switching from the threat side of things and talking about regulations.
Yes, right.
We also had at the beginning of the year, or March timeframe, I think President Biden's executive order on cybersecurity, and that had a focus on zero trust architecture, software supply chain, putting the onus on the suppliers of software, a number of different aspects of that. And other regulations also are influencing things, right? You did some pieces on the SEC cyber rule.
We did quite a few actual episodes when you think about on regulation, right? We did, I think, 2 on SEC basically right at the beginning of the year, and then 1 here recently because at the end of 2023, it obviously went into effect in the middle of December. We did also.
I think it was episode 69, right?
I think so. Yeah. And we also did some things around what we're seeing with cyber resiliency relative to the EU Act. So a lot going on in this 2 directive, right? The evolution of that and becoming a reality in this year, 2024. Regulations, again, just another area that we're going to continue to see more and more of. And we haven't even touched upon some of the proposed regulations and frameworks we're seeing around AI and the implications there. Right.
And we just had the episode just to tie the knot off on the regulations on the NIS2 directive with Bjorn. So speaking of AI, it was what, January timeframe?
Yes,
that
December.
The generative AI, the chat GTP, hit the stage, hit the public, as it were. And what a year, right? I mean, it really. There's been a comparison out there for those that were talking about Oppenheimer and the movie that was a blockbuster this summer, how that movie, which represented like the beginning of the nuclear age, we're sort of like that in that stage right now with AI. And, we experienced, I think, this year, the landmark year associated with realization that we can do so much with AI in many different use cases, right? And in the context of cyber, we can adopt AI to help us be more efficient and automate things and be able to discern a lot more as far as our threat actors that are targeting our organizations, but also the threat actors are leveraging it. Deep fake technology, advanced phishing attacks. There's an arms race that's going to be going on, and it's going to get ugly.
It is. It's a double-edged sword, right? And I think what's interesting is when you do look back to the hype, December 2022 with ChatGPT, and then what's happened over the past year in 2023. It's really interesting to think about. We've been doing AI for so long. Now that we put this interface in front of it to be able to actually engage and have a conversation with the generative AI. This is where things really start.
Didn't we do that episode back with Stefan Zhao back in April?
Yes, that's right. We did. I actually forgot about that one. We did. And he was talking about, again, how long it's really been going on. And this was, again, more of, I guess, a consumerization. And it's good though, right? Because now people become much more, intrigued and want to learn. And the aspects of that, back to your point about cybersecurity, is, we're realizing where there are benefits that we can apply generative AI into making, people that much more efficient in dealing with different types of security issues. But, what's interesting, Stan, I was looking back at kind of the themes, if you will, of episodes, and it kind of fall into three buckets. And basically, it's just what we talked about. It's been about a lot of, the ransomware type of events that have happened out there. Breaches were covered as part of that conversation, but at the end of the day, it was really a lot of kind of that ransomware topic. We talked a heck of a lot about regulations from many different facets. And we also touched upon, shockingly, AI, right? And when I was thinking about going into the new year, I mean, you talked about cyber diplomacy, you talked about cyberspace. I mean, those are some big potential items. I feel it's just going to be a lot of the same. The evolution of more and more regulation, definitely more and more learnings on what's happening with AI and how it's going to impact cyber from both ends, as you mentioned. And unfortunately, much more ransomware taking place.
Another issue that's related that we've talked about over a couple of years as a sort of like a risk mitigation strategy is around cyber insurance.
Yes.
And I think that is another area that's going to get increased attention from the executives as they try to mitigate risk of a breach for their organization, but also it's getting to be more difficult to qualify because the risk insurers, underwriters, are looking for controls to be in place before they take their risk of insuring you.
Well, one of the things that's happened, I've started seeing happen, I should say, with cyber insurance is some CISOs kind of leveraging what the underwriters are pushing back on them, back to their conversations with the board as to what they actually need to put in place to get the investment, right? So there's the good and the bad. They really, really tightened the screws on a lot of the changes that have happened over the past year. We'll see what happens this year, but it probably will get even tighter. But again, it could be used as a lever to help them in their cyber programs.
And I think that's a wise thing to do. I mean, just like you would take advantage of an internal audit finding as a way of driving an initiative internally, you want to take these requirements and drive maturity and improvements in your environment. I don't know if there are other things you want to highlight for 2024. I think that, the unfortunate thing is that the threat landscape is going to get worse, right? But the promise is, and again, going back to AI, that if we can, automate and integrate in some of these capabilities, we may be able to keep up with the Joneses and keep up with the threat landscape a bit more effectively. It's just a matter of how quickly can we move versus the threat actors who are also leveraging that technology.
Well, that's exactly it. It's a race. It's a race because again, we both have the tech, right? And
exactly.
It's just at the end to get there quicker. So I do believe the good guys are going to become much more efficient. But again, it's a tough battle. So we shall see how it goes in 2024.
Now, just switching over to 2024 and what we have in store for the podcast, we're going to continue to do a weekly cadence, and we invite you as listeners to suggest topics and guests that you think that we should have on the podcast. We do have some great guests already lined up, and hope that you are getting benefit from this and enjoying it. But we would love to have your feedback as to other topics that we haven't hit upon, or if you think we're neglecting something. So please speak up and share it in our comments.
Excellent. Until next time, Stan.
Hey, thanks, Ralph.
Hello, producer Ben here, And Rob and Stan refer to quite a few previous episodes of the podcast over the last few minutes. You can find links to all of them in the episode notes. One was called Time to Take Them Seriously, What's Iran Doing in Cyber? It was episode 11 and featured Bill Hagestad, an internationally recognised expert on nation-state cyber threat actors.
The bedrock of their success has been establishing the credibility within the tactical execution, both defensively and offensively. Certainly, as the regime starts to realize the projection of power capability, force projection that these hacker cadres have at the educational level. Again, remember the internet is essentially based at Islamic Assad University. They will start to realize that this is one of those non-proxy types of force projection capabilities. They'll be slower to adapt it as a leadership, but once they do, stand by, folks. Seriously.
That was Bill Hagestad, who featured on episode 11 of the podcast. Thanks for listening to Reimagining Cyber. Goodbye.